Hi, this is part one of a multi-step video tutorial on concepts from chapter 3. And we're going to take a look at a couple of things in stages. And when we put all the different videos together and all the concepts together, that will provide the overall and overarching themes and concepts for the chapter 3 material, which hopefully will provide a bit of an insight for everything that we will be working through this in this chapter. So let's start off with an example here, which we've done some of these in the past. So I'm just going to kind of go through and then we'll build on this in the next video. So we've got Sam, who wants to rent a banquet hall. And in the banquet hall, oops, sorry about that, charges reservation fee of $250 and $20 per plate, or $20 per guest. And so anyway, so when we want to look at this information, we see that there's a reservation fee of $250, and in addition to that, it's $20 per plate. So the equation has already been written for us, and so we're basically looking at the total cost of renting the banquet hall. And so the total cost is basically, that is going to be dependent on the number of guests that arrive. And the number of guests would be basically what we choose, who we choose to invite, or the number of guests who agree to go to this ball. Okay, so that is the independent variable. That's the n, and usually we need to define the variables so we can make some sort of statement. So let n represent, these statements usually start off in the same way. So let n represent the number of guests, and it's very important for us to, no, not guests, guests, there we go. And it's important for us to state that it's the number of, because if we were just to say let n represents guests, well, we wouldn't really know that what's supposed to go in for the n. And if we say number of guests, well, then we're going to substitute a number into in for n, so then we can calculate the total cost. And then here in the next statement, we can say let c represent the total cost. And it's important to say total cost in this particular statement, because we do have a reservation fee, like we've stated here. So there is a reservation fee of $250. And in addition to that, we have $20 per plate. Okay, so we have to make sure that we talk about the total cost, because that involves both of those fees altogether. Okay, so the reservation fee is basically when we want to reserve the banquet hall. We want to reserve that date so that our banquet will proceed, and then the owners of the banquet hall don't get another rental request and rent it to somebody else. So there's $250 for that, and that matches up in the table of values with 0 guests. And I'll go back here briefly here. We know that this is going to be the independent variable here. And in this case, instead of x, we're going to be using n. So I'll just delete that and put n. And the dependent is going to be the cost. Okay, so when before, so not really 0 guests invited, but or attending, but before we take into account any of the guests, we have to pay $250. Okay, so now each of these rows in the table are different sort of scenarios, different, well, yeah, I guess scenarios. So we have, if 5 guests arrive, well, to find the total cost, well, we start out with a $250 reservation fee, and then we have to add $20 for each of the 5 people that arrive or attend. And so we just substitute the 5 in for the n that we see over here in the equation. And actually, maybe I'll just write the equation again here just to make it a little closer. And so we have this. And so then, using GEDMAS, we have to do the multiplication before any addition. So 20 times 5 is 100, and 250 plus 100 is 350. So if 5 guests arrive, or 5 guests attend, the total cost of the banquet is going to be $350. Okay, but what if not 5 guests arrive? What if, or not arrive, attend, 10 guests attend? Well, we have to calculate what the total cost would be if 10 guests attend. So again, we have to start off with a $250 reservation fee, and then we're paying $20 for every guest that arrives, or attends, sorry, I keep saying arrive. So then using GEDMAS, order of operations, we've got 20 times 10. So the food itself is going to cost $200, plus we're adding in the $250 reservation fee. So the total cost is $450 if 10 people attend. If 15 people attend, then to calculate that scenario, again, we're starting off with $250 as the reservation fee, plus $20 for every guest that arrives of the 15 guests. 20 times 5, again, using order of operations, multiplication is before addition. 20 times 15 is 300. 300 plus 250 is 550. Okay, so this is how we would calculate each of these rows of the table of values. And this is giving us the total cost altogether. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to move down here, and we're going to take each of those points and we're going to plot them on the grid. Okay, now the points are already plotted thanks to our good friends at desmos.com. And what I'm going to do though is I'm just going to clarify things a little bit here. So again, as I might have mentioned in past videos, we need a title for every graph. So I'll say total cost of holding a banquet. Okay, and that gives us information about the variables, or at least one of the variables. And then when people look at the axes, they'll see the other information about the about what things we're comparing. So total cost, well, we know total cost is dependent. Okay, so the dependent variable is the C. Okay, so that's dependent. We know that the dependent variable is in the right-hand column of the table of values, and we also know that it is the vertical axis on a graph. So here we've got the total cost. We have to, this is a label. We need to label our grid or our axes, and the units for this is in dollars. And so then we're going to start at 0. Now, not every axis would start at 0, but in these cases, I like to start at the 0, so we just have a little bit of reference to how far these things are from reference or from 0. So the horizontal axis here represents when the total cost is 0. So then if we go up here, we got $100, then $200, then $300, $400, etc. Notice, of course, that the values on the vertical axis are going up by the same quantity. They're going up by the same amount. And also notice that they're separated by the same number of spaces. So it's like even consistent spacing, uniform spacing between each of these values. So 0 to 100 is 5 spaces. From 100 to 200 is 5 spaces. From 200 to 300 is 5 spaces. Okay, so we have to make sure it's all consistent so the graph looks sharp and uniform. Along the and sorry, just one other small detail just to add in here. This is the dependent variable. And so the dependent variable, of course, we don't have to always label this, but I'm just doing this for instructional purposes. The dependent variable is the vertical axis. And while I'm writing this, the horizontal axis is for the independent variable. Okay, the independent variable is the variable whose values we choose. So we choose the independent variables, and in the table of values it was already set, but I had chosen those previously. And so we choose those, or basically in some instances we could say, well, that's what comes first. So if we're comparing, for example, the growth of a tree compared to rainfall, rainfall would come first, and then that would feed the tree, and then hence the tree would grow. So the growth of the tree is dependent on the amount of rain. Okay, so that's kind of thing how that sort of thing would work. So I'm choosing the values here, going up in 5s from 0 to 25, and then we calculate the dependent variable because we're calculating the cost of the banquet. And so then the units for the independent variable are the number of guests. Okay. All right. And so then all we need to do is take a look at these. Let's use blue just for fun. So if I go from the table of values, we start here at $0, or sorry, 0, like before anybody has confirmed that they're attending, and that is going to correspond to $250. So then I'm going to look along the independent axis, go all the way to 0. Well, I'm starting at 0, so I'm starting right at the origin, and I'm not going any steps to the right at all. So I'm just going to go straight up to 250, and that's the first point that I put on my grid. And that actually corresponds to the ordered pair 0, 250. Okay, that's called an ordered pair. It's a point, it's a plotted point, and it's an ordered pair, meaning that it is a pair of numbers, i.e. 2 numbers. It's a pair of numbers in a specific order. And that order is independent followed by dependent. Okay, just like we chose the independent value first for the table of values, and then we calculated the dependent value, the independent value comes first, followed by the dependent value. And that's what happens when we plot the points as well, or when we write the ordered pair. I go back up to the table of values, and I've got 5 and 350. So 5 is the number of people who attend, 350 is the total cost then, and I see I can go along here, along the horizontal axis, starting at the origin. I come along to where 5 would be, which would be right about here, and then you go straight up to where I meet $350, and $350, of course, is halfway between 300 and 400, so $350 is right here. So that is the ordered pair 5, 350. Again, the independent value first, followed by the dependent value. Then I'll go back up to the table of values. I find the next the next pair of points, or the next pair of values. I've got 10 people attending. The total cost is going to be $450. So I start back at the origin. I come across the independent axis to 10, and then I go up until I see $450. And so, of course, 400 450 is halfway between 400 and 500. And so that is going to be the next point right there. And then that is the ordered pair 10, 450. Okay, and then it just continues from there. I just plot the next 3 points in the same manner, and then I end up getting this graph. I used the graphing software from Desmos, and I plotted a line that crossed through all the points that make up this graph. Notice that the graph begins at the dependent axis. Okay, that's where it starts at the point 0, 250, and it's going up as we go to the right. So obviously, we can't have negative people. Like the independent axis is counting up the number of guests that are attending the banquet. We can have 0 guests. Well, I mean, that just indicates the initial value or the initial fee that has to be paid, the reservation fee, before we start taking into account any of the attendees. And so obviously the graph itself, the line, cannot go into the negative. So it has to start at 0 and then move up to the right, because I don't know what a negative person would look like. Well, I mean, a negative number of people. I'm sure I don't want to get too philosophical about negative people, but so that is how we're just going to plot the points. Draw the line with one smooth line straight through all the points. And technically, this should be, no, actually, that's just fine the way it is. I'm going to draw a little arrowhead at the top here, because basically, if we continue adding more and more guests, that line will continue further and further up to the right. Okay, so that's about it for this portion of the lesson. If you have any questions about any of this, please, you may contact me if you're in my class, of course, and we can chat about it. Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next part.